We continue this week the series that I've been doing on morality, and we've entered into that part where I'm speaking about specific moral issues. We spoke about same-sex attraction last week, and this week I'd like to speak about voting and politics, especially in light of their pertinence. The reason this subject is being treated, not only because it's appropriate, is because voting is and should be, or should be I should say, a deliberate choice. And all deliberate choices are governed by the moral teachings of Christ and His Church because they involve love. Now, like last week, when I dropped this into a document, it ended up being 9 pages again. So I'm only going to give you the abridged version, for which I'm sure you are very grateful. The moral principle involved in voting is that of cooperation in the sins of others. We've already spoken about this, but as it applies here, insofar as you can believe the candidates and they actually fulfill their campaign promises, if you vote for that candidate, then you are choosing what they will vote for in the laws that they will implement or uphold, etc. And a Christian cannot in conscience cast a vote contrary to faith and morals. Now, I didn't highlight this part because I was going to leave you to read it later when I print this out. But my next point that I was going to just let you read later is how we've been brainwashed by the media. And unfortunately, I've had several instances of that confronting me today outside of this context. So I want to emphasize that point. If you are getting your talking points solely from the media and solely from one source in the media, then you are going to be led astray, simply because all of them have an agenda and all of them focus on one thing over another. If I had to pinpoint the error among Catholics in this area, is its identification with political parties. And the reason that that's an error is not because we have good political parties, but if you identify with your party, if that's who you are, if that's I'm a lifelong whatever, then you're also going to identify with the errors. And neither of the two major parties and none of the others are representative of Christ completely. Sure, there may be things here and there, but ultimately, if you identify completely with a party, you are guaranteed to be going against Christ in something. One of the things that is not talked about, and this is a side note, but we have to remember that in addition to the intrinsic moral evils, especially as we'll find in one party's platform, we also find the fact that both of the two major parties contribute or encourage things which are actually unconstitutional. The fact is that your candidate or your party is not a savior and certainly not a saint. We have to stop looking at things as good and bad. What I like is good and whatever the other person likes is bad. We're having to discern lesser evils. That may not have been in the past, but it is certainly the case today. There's an interesting quote here from Russell Kirk, which I'll only summarize, which makes the very good observation, which we need to be cognizant of, is that politics is not left and right. Or at least that's not the real important dividing line. The real important dividing line is between those who look at things supernaturally and naturally, and those who only look at things naturally in a world who are content to put on their media source and absorb. But that is the capital sin of sloth, which is the sin that resists making an effort. As we sort through some things today, I want to start with simply pointing out that we are not dealing with a good situation in general. In other words, the political environment is not good. Start with facing the sad fact that the United States is not the Christian nation that everyone calls it. When I say that, not just because things are bad now. I'm talking about the fact that it was not Christian in many of the founders. Freemasonry, which many or most of the founders were, is actually antithetical to Christianity. We're not Christian in our history with all of the anti-Catholicism that we've experienced. We're not Christian in our laws, and we are not Christian in practice in a lot of ways. Washington, D.C. is a mess, and we cannot rely on the government. It cannot be trusted. If you understand the U.S. Constitution, you will see that most of the way Washington operates is not constitutional. Not that the Constitution is a perfect document, but if that's the law of the land and the founding document, then it should be followed. And then I just want to give one simple example of this, and this is when I learned this a couple of years ago, really blew me away. How many of you know that the Federal Reserve Bank, the Fed, which seems to be financially omnipotent in this country, is not actually run by the federal government? And yet we're experiencing, I'm going to stop. Okay, the point is that one fact tells you a whole lot about the mess we're in. The problem is that most of us can't be trusted either, because most Americans don't know how this government is supposed to function. When was the last time? Are there people here who have not read the Constitution? You don't have to raise your hand, it's rhetorical, right? And for some of you who are more mature in years, shall we say, when is the last time you looked at it? I guarantee our young people are either not being taught it or they're not being taught it correctly. So, for example, if you were to ask most people, what is the political system in the United States, they're going to say, democracy. That is not correct. But it's repeated over and over enough that we have been brainwashed by it. We've also been brainwashed by the repetition of the use leader for the people in Washington. No, they're elected officials. They work for us. They are not our leaders. And yet that word is used all the time. There are many Americans, too many Americans, who think that the Electoral College should be abolished, especially when their candidate loses, without understanding why it's in place. What about the principle of subsidiarity? This is from the Catechism. Subsidiarity states that everything needs to be handled at the lowest possible level, which is the way the government of the United States is meant to function. Where does the Constitution say that our rights come from, and what effect does that have on the government being able to limit them? And what does the Establishment Clause mean? If you don't know what the Establishment Clause is, that's part of your homework today. And what is the separation of church and state really? Now, I'm saying all of this only to say that most Americans, or a lot of Americans at least, and I won't make too big a generalization, don't actually know how things are supposed to function. And so there's no way for them to actually make good decisions because they don't understand the system. But we're looking at this morally, and so I want to focus today, I was simply setting up the disastrous scenario with what we are supposed to be doing as Catholic voters. Because voting is a matter of conscience. It's not a matter of gustos, that is, taste or preference. Christians must make a reasonable decision informed by divine revelation. It should not be based on whether we like the candidate or not. And this is extremely important because so many of our politicians and candidates have rather vivid personalities, and the media has given us unprecedented access to their every word and action. But I'm also absolutely disgusted regarding the words and actions I've seen against politicians and political candidates by Christians or so-called Christians, because it's never acceptable to speak about other human beings the way I've seen political figures, especially our president, spoken about. Now, the claim is made that Catholics are not single-issue voters. And in one sense, that's absolutely true. But what that neglects to factor in is that there are distinctions and hierarchies in the issues that we have to consider. They're not all equal. And the first way to divide this up is very simply between non-negotiables and negotiables. Those things which we cannot compromise on, and those open to a little bit of politics discussion, and then we can work things out. The non-negotiables are the dignity of human life, the dignity of marriage and family, and religious and conscience freedoms. And the negotiable ones are war and peace, healthcare, economic policy, migration, immigration, and the environment. Not saying that the goal is negotiable, because we obviously want peace, etc., but how they are brought about and what the policies are is what's negotiable. So again, we have a number of issues that I'm going to comment on, simply to point things out or to get you thinking. Again, you got a lot of homework because I'm not going to do this all today. One question we have to face is that of international relations, about our relationships with other countries and what they are. Immigration is a huge issue, but I'm going to be speaking about that next week, so we're going to skip that right now. Marriage, being a divine institution that our unhallowed hands do not have a right to mess with. The powers and the role of government. I've already alluded to the unconstitutionality of many things. The most important issue, of course, is that of life. And under life, there's three issues. The most important of these, and the most important of all these issues, is the issue of abortion. You can see, for example, in the Democratic platform on page 32, where it says, Democrats are committed to protecting and advancing reproductive health rights and justice. We believe unequivocally, like the majority of Americans, that every woman should be able to access high-quality reproductive health care services, which is fine until you get to the phrase, including safe and legal abortion. So let us be as clear as possible. If children are in cages, we can set them free. If they are hungry, we can feed them. If they are ignorant, we can educate them. If they are dead, the only thing we can do is bury them, and that abomination in the eyes of God, known as Planned Parenthood, will not do that either. The fact that I have to try and convince people who say they follow Jesus Christ that abortion is such a horrendous abomination completely blows my mind. Yes, there are other evils that we perpetrate against people, but it doesn't get more evil than the murder of the unborn. This issue gets obscured with jargon, with slogans, with appeals to emotion, and the error of the ends justify the means. But none of that justifies the mass murder of babies. However, we should neither be in support of war for its own sake or the death penalty necessarily. There's certainly legitimate reasons to go to war, but I think we really need to ask ourselves why we are where we are now. Is it just? Is it appropriate? And what is behind our choice as military action? And while there's a clear precedent for the application of the death penalty in a morally illicit way, the fact is that at least in this country it is not strictly necessary. We also need to look at economic factors, especially this rise of Americans who think that just because socialism hasn't worked for over 100 years that it's going to work now, or the issue of government schools. So how does a Catholic sift through these issues? Well, first of all, we want to remember the issue of cooperation, because while I am not going to tell you how to vote, I certainly am going to give you the moral principles that must govern you. And cooperation is the first of these. Again, if we consent to the person that we are voting for, we are consenting to what they are choosing. Formal cooperation is when you do it interiorly in your will, and that's always sinful when you're cooperating with evil. Material cooperation is when you are participating in an external act. There's a lot of nuances in cooperation, but we can neither consent to the evil nor directly participate in making it happen, which is what voting does. We also have to remember the principle in choosing the lesser of two evils. Now, we can never choose an evil, but when all your options are somehow evil, and you choose the lesser of them, or the least of them, you're not choosing the evils that you're voting for, the person you're voting for. You're voting to lessen the evils that would come about if someone else won. And it's also necessary to avoid consequentialism and proportionalism. So if I come across as a supporter, and I'm trying to avoid supporting anyone, if I come across as a supporter of one party over another, it's because these principles make one party align more with Catholicism, but note the word more, not completely. So in this mess of political landscape of America, where does that leave us Catholic voters? Well, the first question to consider is, does a Catholic have an obligation to vote? Well, the truth is that the Church has not taught on this subject, because this kind of political system is actually relatively new in the history of the world. Certainly there is something to be said for, by not voting, you're allowing whatever does happen. So there is something to be said there. But because the church hasn't given a definite teaching on this, I can't say. The next question is, of course, is there any candidate or party that a Catholic cannot vote for? Well, if you haven't guessed it by now, the answer to that is yes. You cannot vote for a party that has as its platform, as the Democrats do, the expanding of the availability of infanticide, which is clearly the most serious moral evil at stake. Again, that does not mean that your other options are good. It just simply means that is clearly the worst evil, and if you listen to anything anyone says, you know that they're 100% behind it. Does this mean that a Catholic must vote for Trump then? No. And if you think you've heard me say that a Christian must vote for Trump, you're not listening. This is not what I'm saying. Since there's no moral obligation to vote, you may abstain from voting, vote for a third-party candidate, or write Christ the King on your ballot, which might be the best thing for you to do, because quite frankly at this point, that's all that's going to help us. I'm not going to endorse a political candidate, but I will say that you have a moral obligation, unequivocally a grave obligation, to know your candidate's positions and to weigh them by divine standards. The amount and kind of bile that I've seen directed towards the president is absolutely irrational, demonstrating that people are not weighing issues, they're simply voting. You don't have to like him. I don't necessarily like him. But you certainly don't have an obligation to vote for him. But you better measure him by the same standard you wish to be measured, as our Lord says in the Sermon on the Mount. That doesn't just go for the president. That goes for all those people in Washington who, God save them, are a mess. I've been watching a little bit of the hearings this week, and lots and lots of prayers. We keep hearing how important this election is, and it is important, because what's at stake is your souls. Voting is a serious moral decision that requires real deliberation and considering all of the issues at stake from the perspective of Christ. And I hope that those of you who will be voting do so firstly as a follower of Jesus Christ for his greater glory in your own salvation.